Fiscal Policy and the Job Guarantee by William Mitchell and Warren Mosler. The Job Guarantee Buffer Stock Approach. The Job Guarantee proposal was conceived independently by Mitchell 1996-1998A and Mosler 1997-98. It has since been developed further by a range of authors listed previously. A recent extended summary of its evolution and features is found in Mitchell and Watts 2001. The job guarantee is also based on the buffer stock principle. Footnote 8. Mitchell 2000A discusses the link between the job guarantee approach and the agricultural price support schemes like the wool floor price scheme, introduced by the Australian government in 1970. While generating full employment for wool production, there was an issue of what constituted a reasonable level of output in a time of declining demand. The argument is not relevant when applied to unemployed labor. If there is a price guarantee below the prevailing market price and a buffer stock of working hours constructed to absorb the excess supply at the current market price, then full employment can be generated without tinkering with the price structure. The other problem with commodity buffer stock systems is that they encouraged overproduction, which ultimately made matters worse when the scheme was discontinued and the product was dumped onto the market. These objections do not apply to maintaining a labor buffer stock. See Graham, 1937. End footnote. Under the job guarantee, the public sector offers a fixed wage job, which we consider to be price rule spending, to anyone willing and able to work, thereby establishing and maintaining a buffer stock of employed workers. This buffer stock declines, when private sector activity expands. The job guarantee thus fulfills an absorption function to minimize the real costs associated with the flux of the private sector. Berger and Pure, 1980. When private sector employment declines, public sector employment will automatically react and increase its payrolls. The nation always remains fully employed, with only the mix between private and public sector employment fluctuating as it responds to the spending decisions of the private sector. Since the job guarantee wage is open to everyone, it will functionally become the national minimum wage. To avoid disturbing the private sector wage structure and to ensure the job guarantee is consistent with price stability, the job guarantee wage rate should probably be set at the current legal minimum wage, though an initially higher job guarantee wage may be set higher as part of a broader priority for an industry policy. The job guarantee introduces no relative wage effects, and the rising demand per se does not necessarily invoke inflationary pressures because firms are likely to increase capacity utilization to meet the higher sales volumes. Given that the demand impulse is less than required in the TV Nairu economy, it is clear that if there were any demand pull inflation, it would be lower under the job guarantee. There are no new problems faced by employers who wish to hire labor to meet the higher sales levels. The rise in demand will stimulate private sector employment growth while reducing job guarantee employment and spending. However, these demand pressures are unlikely to lead to accelerating inflation. While the job guarantee policy frees wage bargaining from the general threat of unemployment, two factors offset this. First, in professional occupational markets, while we wait, unemployment will discipline wage demands. In professional occupational markets, while any wait, unemployment will discipline wage demands. The demand pressures may eventually exhaust this stock, and wage price pressures may develop. With a strong and responsive tertiary education sector, skill bottlenecks can be avoided. Second, private firms would still be required to train new workers in job-specific skills in the same way they would in a non-job guarantee economy. However, job guarantee workers are likely to have retain higher levels of skill than those who are forced to succumb to lengthy spells of unemployment. This changes the bargaining environment rather significantly because the firms now have reduced hiring costs. Previously, the same firms would have lowered their hiring standards and provided on-the-job training and vestibule training in tight labor markets. The job guarantee policy thus reduces the hysteretic inertia embodied in the long-term unemployed and allows for a smoother private sector expansion. It is also worth noting that with high long-term unemployment, the excess supply of labor does not pose a very strong threat to wage bargaining. Mitchell, 1987, 1998a. We thus hypothesize that the threat factor under the job guarantee is now higher. The job guarantee wage provides an inbuilt inflation control mechanism. Mitchell, 1998a, 2000a. The ratio of job guarantee employment to total employment is called the buffer employment ratio, BER. The buffer employment ratio conditions the overall rate of wage demands. When the buffer employment ratio is high, real wage demands will correspondingly lower. If inflation exceeds the government's announced target, tighter fiscal policy would be triggered to increase the buffer employment ratio, which entails workers transferring from the inflating sector to the fixed-price job guarantee sector. Ultimately, this attenuates the inflation spiral. So instead of a buffer stock of unemployed being used to discipline the distributional struggle, the job guarantee policy achieves it via compositional shifts in employment. The buffer employment ratio that results in stable inflation is called the non-accelerating inflation buffer employment ratio, NIBR. It is a full employment steady state job guarantee level, which is dependent on a range of factors including the path of the economy. Footnote 9. There is an issue about the validity of an unchanging nominal anchor in an inflationary environment. The job guarantee wage would be adjusted in line with productivity growth to avoid changing real relativities. Its viability as a nominal anchor relies on the fiscal authorities reining in any private wage price pressures. Clearly, in an hyperinflation environment, the discipline of the job guarantee wage would fail. But in historical experience, these circumstances have been rare. End footnote. Would the NIBR will be higher than the NIRU? The issue has its roots in the fact that a particular level of demand, unemployment, curbs the inflationary process in a NIRU world. Clearly, if we introduce a job guarantee scheme, the initial level of job guarantee employment will deliver a higher demand level than inherited under the NIRU economy. Logically, in a NIRU world, this should be inflationary. But the job guarantee policy introduces loose, full employment, for the reasons noted above. In this sense, the inflation restraint exerted via the NIBR is likely to be more effective than using a NIRU as strategy. Following Layard, 1997, we concur that, quote, if we want a big cut in unemployment, we should focus sharply on those policies which stand a good chance of having a really big effect, end quote. Footnote 10. Layard, 1997, concludes that, quote, unemployment is one of the major sources of misery in our society. A civilized society should not tolerate our present levels of unemployment. If we seriously want a big cut in unemployment, we should focus sharply on those policies which stand a good chance of having a really big effect. It is not true that all policies which are good in general are good for unemployment. There are in fact very few policies where the evidence points at any large unambiguous effect on unemployment, and some widely advocated policies for which there is little clear evidence. End quote. He includes changes to Social Security taxes, changes to job protection rules, productivity improvements, and decentralizing wage bargaining as policies whose effects are difficult to forecast. He believes that they are unsuitable policies to create large reductions in unemployment. End footnote. Layard believes that supply-side remedies have achieved little to reduce unemployment. He argues that further cuts in the duration of benefits would only increase employment at the cost of the creation of an underclass with an ever-widening inequality of wages. 1997. He now prefers government job creation, which would allow people to reacquire work habits, to prove their working capacity, and to restore them to the universe of employable people. This is an investment in Europe's human capital. Layard, 1997. The job guarantee clearly is the big effect the Australian economy needs to initially clean up the huge stock of unemployed that has persisted since the mid-1970s. The ongoing size of the job guarantee pool is likely to be relatively smaller as the economy adjusts to higher levels of activity associated with full employment.